зрителей. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening and watching to Rashkin Report, and I am your host, Yuri Rashkin. And well, usually this space is occupied in Russian language, but alas, tonight we're going to do it in English, which is almost a relief. And I'm glad to be joined by Dmitry Abramson, who usually joins me on Monday nights, and we discuss things that have to do with how to, I don't know, protect and inform people about some of the impending dangers that we're dealing with in this country, but doing, informing people in Russian. But tonight we're going to do it in English because you know what? I think it's important to do it in English tonight. So Dima, Dmitry, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, Yuri. I'm good. Could be better. I am preoccupied with my thoughts about what might happen in Ukraine. So, we usually discuss different topics in Russian, but I don't think we can do anything but talk about Ukraine today. And we decided to do it in English for a change.
Right. I think that I keep getting asked about what is going on, what is likely to happen, what do I think Putin is thinking, and it's an interesting conversation because I don't know that there is a simple answer, and a long answer becomes kind of a boring answer. So I think that we can kind of flush it out and see if we can come up with a reasonable explanation. But, I think back to your feelings. I think that let's clarify, you live now in New York City area, but originally you are from Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Correct.
And I live in Wisconsin, and I'm originally from Moscow, Russia. And there's been a lot of tension between Russia and Ukraine. Like when I was living there, none, didn't exist. It was all one country that somehow got along. Since then, right now, very different. And Dima, you're concerned about your hometown, or you're concerned about the whole state of Ukraine? Of what is your concern here mostly?
Well, it's probably all of the above, Yura. So my hometown is the second largest town in Ukraine, is right on the border with Russia. So if anything happens, it depends what Putin decides to do, but it's high probability that if he decides to do anything, Kharkiv is going to be somehow in his path. So I still have my cousins and childhood friends in Ukraine, including in Kharkiv. So that's certainly a concern on a personal level, huge concern. Then on a more geopolitical level, we have a situation where a country that is striving to become a fully functioning democracy. They are a democracy today, and they're trying to align themselves more with democratic values. As a result, they are attracted to Europe and the West, and there is a bully on the block, a huge country, Russia, that was temporarily also trying to be democratic, but with Putin in power, it became basically a totalitarian state, or I even like it better, Masha Gessen's definition, a mafia state, where mafia is controlling the entire country, and they are trying to attack their neighbor, pro-democratic, pro-Western neighbor. So all of the above, and Yura, as I was saying, I get pop-up messages on my phone with the news, breaking news, and I jump, because every time I get something on my phone, I fear that it started, that Russia actually attacked Ukraine and started a massive war, probably on the scale we haven't seen since World War II.
However, we seem to have a pretty solid disconnect here, which I'm exploring right now on Facebook, on my page, because I asked people, I said, where do you rate, how concerned are you that there's going to be big open war breaking out between Russia and Ukraine? Because we have to be clear, war has been started in 2014 and been going on since 2014, but we're talking about the big wave of aggression involving all these, over 100,000 Russian troops. how concerned are you? And people are saying on a scale of 1 to 10, consistently, I see that English speakers are way more concerned than Russian speakers. And there is this opinion when I saw this, because there's, I think, Economist actually wrote about it, saying that Russians are not very concerned. And one of the comments that I read said, well, so who cares what they think? Putin is going to do what Putin is going to do. Like, it doesn't matter. But I think this is not about like what their wishes are. It's that they just don't think that Putin would be dumb enough to do this.
Well, Yuri, and I think somebody mentioned on one of your posts something that I agree with. We got to separate the probability of this happening with the consequences if it does happen. The probability, the answer to the probability is kind of easy because we don't know. Easy in the sense we don't know what Putin is going to do. You know, he has a certain agenda. He has certain interests in behaving a certain way. The West collectively, and you know, I can't praise you know, United States and NATO in what they so far were able to do. They collectively created a unified, nearly unified front, promising Putin very serious consequences. But this is pretty much as far as they're going to go. So now Putin is going to weigh, you know, he's going to do his cost-benefit analysis from his, you know, crazy perspective of his crazy goals, and he's going to have to decide: is it worth for him to invade Ukraine? Is the benefit to him more than the, you know, better than, you know, more valuable than the consequences, or not? So this is the situation we're in. We don't really know. The point is, it could happen at any time. It could happen right now as we speak. It could happen in a week. Maybe he'll decide to park his troops there for a while and then do something. Or maybe it will be a half measure where he will not try to conquer the entire country, but will create additional mischief in certain regions, or maybe, you know, maybe occupy certain regions. We don't really know. But whatever he does, if it does happen, the consequences are very, very dire. And you know, we can talk it from multiple perspectives, but it's bad for everybody. The only good outcome of this is that he decides that it's you know, it's not worth the risk, it's not worth the fallout, and just, you know, takes his troops and leaves. That's the best outcome here, if it happens.
Well, and I guess I'm wearing this Vegas shirt in part because of to kind of acknowledge the gamble and the gambling situation that we're in here. Let's take a look at some of the reasons why Putin may want to do this, because I think that this is a puzzle that a lot of people would like to understand, because it almost doesn't really make sense. Like, if it's happening, or since Putin announced that he is interested, we can like kind of fill some of the possible reasons. Well, you know, Ukraine has some resources and some minerals and stuff. But it really wasn't a big concern before, and even that kind of resource Putin can always obtain legally, more or less, through his corruption and business deals. So why invade now?
So Yuri, there are multiple answers to this. There are multiple layers. I don't think anybody can actually get in Putin's head, but there are multiple explanations consistent with what we know about the situation. Putin, at one point, he said that the worst event of the 20th century, I think I'm pretty much quoting, that the worst event of the 20th century was the fall of the Soviet Union. Not something else, like not even World War II or World War I. He is saying it's the fall of the Soviet Union. What does it mean? What was the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union was basically 15 states that were forced with, you know, with communist ideology, with just pure conquests, forced to be one country. And when the Soviet Union fell apart in the early 90s, basically all those 14 states separated from Russia. And they all started to pursue their own course. Some aligned immediately with the West. Some eventually became democratic countries, or tried to become democracies. Some didn't. Some became totalitarian regimes, and they still exist. So they chose a different path, but outside of that empire. So Putin comes to power in 2001, I think, so about 20 years ago. And he basically changed. So Russia was kind of on a very slow democratic path with a lot of problems, a lot of corruption, a lot of issues that are pretty common, when you try to build a democracy basically from scratch, where there was a totalitarian state before that. But it was making small steps in the right direction. And then Putin comes to power, and eventually he turns everything around. He gets free media under his control. He starts prosecuting political opponents. The corruption is unheard of, off the charts. Putin is probably one of the richest men alive. Nobody can actually estimate how much he stole exactly, but we're talking about obscene numbers, obscene amounts of money. And he is trying to, on one level, he's trying to rebuild the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, however you want to call it, but get all those countries and territories somehow back under Russian control. Either, maybe there's installing a friendly government like it was in Ukraine at one point for a few years, or with Belarus, where, basically Belarus doesn't really have much of it's a totalitarian state to begin with, but it has to pretty much align with Russia because it has no other option, and so on. So he's trying in some way rebuild the Russian Empire at the expense of everybody else who doesn't want to be a part of it, because it was never I think it's safe to say that most countries didn't want to be in the Soviet Union, so they don't want to go back. So that's one reason. The other reason that he claims he's using is that NATO is somehow a threat to Russia. Now, it's a very logically problematic statement on multiple levels. So let's unpack this. NATO was initially an alliance against the Soviet Union. That is true. When the Soviet Union fell apart, there was this feeling that maybe NATO is no longer needed, there's no enemy to fight. There were some joint operations, in the Middle East, especially when the US was attacked on the September 11th, NATO did respond as a unified front against the Afghanistan. But otherwise, there was this feeling that maybe NATO is not as useful anymore now that the Soviet Union is no more. And then Putin starts threatening other countries and basically reinvigorates the alliance. He claims that NATO is his enemy and they threatening him, but he is the reason that NATO again unified, especially now, against Putin. He created this crisis. If his stated goal was, I don't want to be threatened by NATO, he didn't have to do anything. He could just stay with.
Does this mean that he is lying, or he's really bad at achieving his goals?
That's a hard question. He's definitely lying because he is the reason he should fear NATO, right? So he's cause and the causation is reversed, right? As I like to say, he caused this to happen. Right. So now he's not lying because he kind of forced himself into that situation. He made it a reality, right? By threatening his neighbors, by threatening NATO, NATO became a threat to him. But NATO is a defensive alliance, right? So NATO is not going to attack him first. They will protect members of the alliance, which begs the question that if he thinks NATO is threatening him, then maybe he wants to attack those new NATO countries, new members of the NATO alliance, and now he can't. So again, it's hard to get into his head, but that's what it looks like.
Because it is an important point, I think, to make, to highlight that when we say, well, NATO is getting closer to Russia, it's because all these former republics of Soviet Union are running to NATO and saying, please, we want to be a member and protect us against Russia next door. So that kind of again, reverse causation here, cause and effect, just highlighting.
Yep, that's exactly what's happening. And now even the countries who were historically neutral or were not part of NATO are now seriously considering entering the alliance because they don't want to, if Putin decides to do something against them, because again, he wants this Russian empire to grow, then they want to have protection. In fact, Putin said the other day that he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO because, he is afraid that, well, if he then has to attack Ukraine, then he will have to fight NATO and nobody wants that. So he almost kind of said what he thought, I think, at one point. So now Ukraine is not in NATO. Ukraine tried to, it wasn't what we could say, wasn't fast enough. NATO wasn't really interested maybe in adding Ukraine that fast, because there are a lot of there are a lot of parameters of how you have to join NATO, and I think Ukraine wasn't meeting those parameters. I think one of them is you have to have a territorial integrity. But when Ukraine tried to move closer to the West, Putin basically organized a war on the eastern part of Ukraine. So now, even if everything else was great, no corruption, fully functioning democracy, everything is great, NATO couldn't take Ukraine in because there was an active war on the eastern side of the country. And he also annexed Crimea, which is a peninsula on the Black Sea. So it was Ukrainian for, I think, since the 50s. And he just quietly sent his troops and they just annexed part of the country in
Dima,
2014.
Here's what I love about, of course, this channel is that it is a bridge of sorts. And we have commenters who may not even understand what you and I are saying right now, but are still trying to participate and are commenting and providing useful information, or at least interesting information. Because, for instance, why would Putin be attacking now, or the 16th that's been announced? Now we're trying to determine if Zelensky, when he said that, was he joking or was he serious? But nonetheless, we have a date. So we have a viewer who is writing here in Russian that the second full moon of 2022 is going to occur on Wednesday, 16th of February, because the moon is going to be in constellation of Lion. This period is considered a great time for realization of plans made, projects planned before. So this is so he's looking at astrological signs, and it is a legitimate topic of conversation in Russian, because again, when there's no politics, people start trying to figure out what's going to happen and how our decisions are being made. So there's some astrological omens for the 16th as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't take astrology seriously, because Putin can just read it and choose another day to spite.
No, but you know what? I'm highlighting it from the point of view is that he has at this point a reputation of being somebody who follows those signs, because he has destroyed any sort of semblance of opposition. He's now mostly guarding himself against supernatural powers. So that could be a part of that kind of a constellation.
I have heard that he is somehow interested in symbolism, and he might pick a date that means something. But again, I don't know. If his generals tell him, when the best time to do it, then I don't know if astrology is going to sway him one way or the other. But the situation with Ukraine, so NATO is his kind of stated reason, and Ukraine is not going to join NATO. But even when Ukraine tried to, not going to join anytime soon, but even when Ukraine tried to join the European Union, that wasn't good enough for him either. Which brings me to the next point, that he can't afford to have a successful, functioning democracy right on his border. He can't, because that could spread into Russia. That could demonstrate to Russians that, yeah, you could live well under democracy. And that actually, there's a bigger picture here. We live in a world right now. We used to live in a world where it was the West against communism, right? It was a bipolar world, the Soviet Union on one hand, and NATO, United States, Europe on the other. Now it's kind of got modified to democracy against totalitarian regimes. And the totalitarian regimes, it's not just Russia, it's also China and others. They are kind of trying to demonstrate that they're more effective. at achieving their goals. The democracy is messy. That, like, look at the United States. You guys can't figure out, you can't pass laws, you can't figure out what to do. It's messy. And look how much we're accomplishing by, central planning, or, the Communist Party in China, or strong hand in Russia. Like, we can really accomplish a lot of things. And it's a mirage, because anybody who lived in a totalitarian state will tell you that that's not how it works. That it's unless you're directly benefiting from the regime somehow. Maybe you're somebody's relative, or I don't know, somehow you're in that circle. Everybody else is suffering, and economically and politically, and they lose rights. And the further down the rabbit hole you go, the worse it gets. Even with genocide, mass killings, which also happen under totalitarian regimes. So democracy is still the way to go, but they are actively undermining this. Now, back to Russia and Ukraine. Imagine Ukraine is a successful democracy, part of the European Union, maybe they switch to Euro. Maybe they join NATO, maybe they don't. And Russians and Ukrainian, historically, right, Russians will know that, hey, there's another country that used to be, so the Soviet Union, used to be, we used to be the same one, same people in a way. And now they're very successful, and we are not. And as a result, it may threaten Putin's regime. So if you look at it from his perspective of survival, right, he controls the country, he controls the media, he controls the opposition. He can pretty much do almost whatever he wants. But if there is a revolution against him, of people, who are dissatisfied with where he's taking Russia, that's a threat to him. And that may be the more realistic reason why he can't afford to have a successful Ukraine, why he has to take over, why he has to destabilize it.
So you feel the fact that Ukraine is moving away from Russian sphere of influence is really the main reason that Putin wants to sink its claws in it and bring it back?
Well, I think there are multiple reasons, but yeah, I think that's definitely the big one, where he what we call colored revolutions. There was an orange revolution in Ukraine. He can't afford this spilling over into Russia, and it could easily, if Ukraine is successful, it could demonstrate to the Russians how much they've been taken advantage of by Putin.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to say something that I say very rarely in English. Press like, subscribe, leave comments. I always ask people to leave comments right where you're watching this from, because YouTube is global and people are watching this channel from all over the world, and it's awesome. So, and there's something that you can help the channel. You can just leave a comment saying where you're watching it from. And get the word out there. And of course, this is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin, and I'm located in Wisconsin. Originally, I am from Moscow, Russia, which at the time was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And I've been in the United States for over 30 years. And my guest tonight is Dmitry Abramson, who is joining us from New York City area, regular contributor of Rashkin Report, the YouTube channel, and also a resident of the United States for decades, as you can tell from the way we managed to communicate. Dima, here's a couple of questions I'd like to throw at you. First of all, Putin kind of has a reputation of acting sneaky. Let's remember that he annexed Crimea when Ukraine was almost literally on fire in, going through a revolution. And what a good thing for a neighbor to do is to run in and try to steal something while you're having a fire, house on fire. So this doesn't seem to be one of those situations, because everybody's watching. The world is watching. We're opening up his shells of setups one after the other, and we're revealing his schemes. Does that, I guess, I don't know. How do you make sense of this?
So again, let's be honest, we don't really know what's in his head, right? Anybody who says they do and predict the future, I mean, they're more astrologists than analysts.
And we have astrologists too, as you now know, right?
Yes, yes. But my take on this may be very subjective, for what it's worth. That he didn't realize that he's going to get that much of a pushback from the West. So he felt that, you know, when he once he created the crisis, when he moved all the troops to the border, right? I think by some reports, it's at least 130,000 troops surrounding Ukraine from three sides. When he moved those troops to the border, I don't think he expected, he thought he's going to have a few good options, like in a chess game, right? You make a move and you say, okay, depending on what the opponent does, I'll be able to do something even better, like in the next move. So he thought he had maybe 3-4 options. Maybe I think his favorite one, I would guess, because he's done it before, manufacture a crisis. So, you know, move the troops to the border of Ukraine, threaten that he's going to invade, demand concessions from the West. So, you know, maybe the West will agree to something that they didn't want to give him before. So, you know, maybe there's going to be a new carrot for him. I don't know. Could be some guarantees. Could be I don't even know what he might want from the West, but you know, he could get something. Maybe guarantees that Nord Stream 2 is going to operate, you know, or I don't know, something like that.
You know, there's an interesting point being made over and over, which is that for Putin, just being spoken to is a big deal. The fact that he's being offered, you know, here's President of the United States that is speaking to you, Mr. Putin, that this is a big enough deal. And it kind of, not to insult anybody, but it's, you know, if we're exchanging visits with presidents or prime ministers, you know, to avert war, then maybe that's enough. That's a cheap enough price to pay, right?
Yeah, and this is a good point, Yuri. I'll come back to this. I just want to make a point here that he creates like his you know, scenario that he plays, right? So he creates a crisis, he gets a carrot, he gets some concessions, and he disappears for, I don't know, a few months, a year, and then he creates a new crisis, and the West go through this over and over again, right? So it didn't work this time. This time we said no. You're not getting anything out of this. But this was one of his scenarios, good scenarios. The other one, the one you mentioned, yeah, of course. He wants to be recognized, well, Russia and him as a, you know, basically equivalent to the whole, I mean, he is the state at this point. He wants to be recognized as an equal in a world where he's not equal. This is not the Soviet Union. Russia is a very weak country economically. As somebody said, it's basically a gas station that pretends to be a country.
But it is led by the world's richest person.
Well, he stole all this money, right? So yeah, but it's a mafia state. He is the head of the mafia. He's surrounded by his pawns in that you know, organized crime cartel. But as a country, like economically, it's almost completely dependent on its energy exports. So they export gas, oil, coal. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but this is like the majority of their economy, right? But he wants to be treated as an equal, where in fact we are much more, as the United States is much more concerned with China right now. He is forcing us to deal with him because he is creating this manufacture. He manufactured this crisis. So that's one of, I think that's one of his calculations. I'm sure it looks great inside Russia, where, you know, his state television can show everybody, look, you know, they're all running to meet with him and they're all trying to negotiate something, and he looks equal, kind of like a dictator of North Korea when Trump decided to meet with him. So it's, you know, it's kind of on the same, you know, on the same level. Well, I mean, it's, of course, Russia is more dangerous than North Korea, but you know, it's the same sentiment. But there is one little asterisk, maybe a big asterisk. Russia has nuclear weapon.
And that's really the next thing that, you know, since you mentioned that more dangerous than North Korea, nuclear weapons, I think, what, 6,000 warheads or something like that. mean, the problem that I'm hearing again in Russian and a little bit in English, as far as like the news kind of stuff, that Putin may view using nuclear weapons on a kind of a scale, that there's a big nuclear weapon and there's not so big nuclear weapon. And considering that there's general disregard for human life that comes with that kind of a culture and worldview, then why not? You know, and another really big issue with Putin, which we will discuss, I think, in the end, is just the fact that he's been in power for 20 years. But let's stick to nuclear weapons for now. How do you view the chance of this nuclear? Again, it's like you need to be a psychiatrist to discuss these things because and Putin is not our patient. We're just kind of are we his hostages?
In a way, well, that's how he wanted it to play out, and we just talked about it, right? And we refused to satisfy his demands. But sticking to the nuclear, So the traditional, or maybe historical approach to nuclear power is it's a deterrent. So I have nukes, you have nukes. We're gonna maybe have a conflict up to a point, but we're not really gonna go into all-out war, because if it escalates to nuclear weapons, it's mutual destruction, right? That's the classical approach. Now, there is a, I don't know if it's new, but a different way to look at this. It doesn't have to be an all-out nuclear war. There are tactical nukes, as you said, there are smaller nukes. So there is this concept that's called a bloody nose, where you don't actually destroy your opponent, but you hit them in the nose and they bleed, so it's called a bloody nose. So you use one nuke, let's say in a certain escalation scenario, and you say, "See, I could do this." And if you try something else, I have more of them, right? So this is where we start talking about not an all-out. Okay, we're going to launch every rocket, every nuclear rocket that we have, but wait, we're going to drop one nuke and see how you feel after that, right? So kind of in a way, what happened when the World War II, when we dropped 2 nukes on Japan, they capitulated because they realized there's nothing they have to stop the war. There's nothing they can do at this point. So it's kind of the same situation.
They didn't have nuclear weapons to shoot back at us.
Right, they did. But again, where he's going to use the nuke is the question, right? He would be crazy to use a nuke against any other nuclear power. Probably crazy to use it against any NATO power. Any NATO member. Could he use a nuke against a country that doesn't have a nuke and is not a member of NATO? I hope not. But I don't know. I don't know what's in his head. So I would say it's extremely unlikely. But if he is crazy enough, then yeah, maybe he would use a tactical nuke somewhere where he feels like he needs to scare his opponents.
What do you think about the concept that there's a certain responsibility or accountability that United States and some other powers have, because there was a Budapest memorandum that was signed, as a result of which Ukraine turned over its nuclear weapons, which it did have and now no longer has because it was going to be protected. Obviously in 2014, that Budapest memorandum, that was not triggered. It was obviously not it was not the fifth part of whatever the NATO agreement where immediate, there's attack against one, attack against all. But people still refer to Budapest memorandum as a kind of an important document that is that it's kind of being, not followed. What do you think about that?
So this was, so when the Soviet Union fell apart, a lot of member states inherited the nuclear weapons, including Ukraine. Now, you have to understand, in the 90s, when it happened, all those former Soviet republics, including Russia, they were in a very weak state. The economy was collapsing. Nobody knew what's going to happen next. I mean, the Soviet Union was basically the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union is defeated. And I think, kind of a side note, I think the West should have paid more attention when it happened and kind of helped those countries along. And instead, most of the West said, okay, we're done. We defeated the Soviet Union and everything is going to be happy after that. So Ukraine was in a very weak state. It probably, I mean, my understanding is I probably didn't want to deal with nuclear weapons in that state anyway. And they negotiated a very, I think it's fair to say, weak agreement, where they basically was a memorandum, I think, of understanding that was signed by the United States, United Kingdom, I think Russia, maybe some other countries, that yes, Ukraine is going to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for territorial integrity, meaning the way Ukraine was, the Ukrainian borders were at the time in the 90s. That's, everybody will guarantee that nobody will attack them. So in essence, Ukraine was becoming a, neutral country. Nobody will attack us. We don't need nuclear weapons. We're good. Nobody could have predicted that 20 years later, Russia will become a totalitarian state with imperial ambitions, and will try to get Ukraine, back as part of its territory.
To be fair, there are people who never kind of lost suspicion that Russia was going to come back like it is now. But there were a lot of Americans who, for some reason, felt like, whoa, Russia is not a problem anymore. Like you mentioned earlier, they're never going to be an enemy again. And we can, frankly, refocus our attention on other crises. There have been people, Russian speaking primarily, who never give up the suspicion. But, live and learn.
Yep. And the memorandum that when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and created a war on the eastern part of Ukraine, that's a good question. I mean, it wasn't strong enough to force other countries to intervene. So I don't think it said specifically then we're going to have to attack Russia or something, whoever attacks Ukraine. It wasn't like a NATO level, Article 5, right? It wasn't like that. So the West the reaction from the West was underwhelming, and I think there was some sanctions.
Okay, what do you think about? Okay, let me then just focus then on this response of the West. There are people who will compare what we're watching Russian Federation go through right now with what Nazi Germany was going through, let's say 1933 through 1945. And, it didn't happen overnight, but it was kind of a steady drumbeat to, where things ended up. Granted, there's obviously differences so far. Let's continue to hope that there's going to be lots of differences. For one, Putin seems to be much better, have much better attitude towards Jews than Hitler did. So thank God for that. But he has plenty of other, he's basically, it's a different problem, but nonetheless. Do you see parallels, or do you see that this is a totally different situation? And in the sense, when we looked in 1930s, the world was trying to pacify an aggressor, and we saw how that turned out. Now, since 2014, we've been watching how the world has been trying to pacify an aggressor, and it kind of seems like that's just the common sense thing to do. I mean, who wants to go to war with Russia? But it seems like it's
Yuri, я потерял. I think I lost you for a second. Are we back?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
So I think I got the gist of your question.
Sure.
Look, as they say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So Russia is not an exact copy of Germany in 1930s, right? But there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn between what happened before the World War II and what Putin is doing right now, and there are clear parallels. So without getting people to scream, "Oh my God, you can't compare anybody to Hitler. If you do, it's like you lost the argument or something." But we're not there. But there are a lot of parallels of what's happening. So one parallel is that how Hitler started the World War II. It didn't start with an all-out war. He was trying to see how far he can go before he will get a response from the other countries. So he would, take I think the first thing he did, and forgive me, I don't have the, the articles in front of me, but the first thing I think he did was that there was a territory that Germany lost after the First World War II to France, and he wanted to take it back.
World War One.
I'm sorry, World War One. Yes, you're right. Yeah, of course. He wanted to take it back, so he sent his army, and as far as I know, his directive was, look, if anybody resists, just fall back, don't fight. Nobody resisted. That was the first, right? So they said, okay, fine, it's German territory anyway, let him have it, right? So then I think it was protecting Germans in Czechoslovakia. Okay, nobody responded. Then finally it became Poland. But by this time, he realized that he's not going to get a response. And while he's conquering other territories, he's getting stronger, right? He had a better military at this point. And only when he attacked Poland and conquered Poland, that's when because France and United Kingdom, they had a clear alliance with Poland. That's when they had to respond based on that. And even that, as you know, even that was questionable because Britain was still trying. I think there were some elements in Britain that were trying to see if they can avoid the war. So that's the parallel right now. I think it was 2008 when Putin first there was a Chechen conflict, which left a lot of big questions as far as war crimes and who did what. Then there was
that's even in the 1990s.
That was even before Putin. Then there was a 20% of Georgia, I think, was taken over by Russians
in 2008.
2008, right? Nothing happened. I mean, maybe there were some sanctions, but nothing that would deter him. Then there was a 2014 Crimea, and started the war on the eastern side of Ukraine. Again, nothing happened that would deter him enough from going further. This is the first time where we are anticipating his next move. Well, it's pretty clear he moved, more than 100,000 troops to the borders. So we're anticipating that he might attack Ukraine, but we are actually threatening with something more serious than before, where it might actually change his calculus.
Well, let's take a look at what is it that is changing his, what has changed, because a lot of people, I would say, fairly give a lot of credit to the Biden administration, which has brought a very different flavor of doing business to White House than we had for 4 years prior. I mean, we don't have a president that eats documents now. So I think that has been a big change. And I'm surprised, honestly, by Putin's inability to sit and wait. I mean, in the United States, there's a lot of divisions, it seems like, that we're working through. You would think that if you just sit back and let us do our own thing, who knows who we're going to elect next time. But he's not waiting, Putin. He's pushing forward. And I agree with you. I just think that he the way I look at it is he bought into his own hype. He's been told for so long that he is great and wonderful, and his media tells him this day and night. And also it kept telling him that his opposition, in this case Biden, was frail, weak, old, and will just roll over, especially after what happened with Afghanistan. And on one hand, we can't deny that there was a rapid and at times disorganized exit from Afghanistan that nonetheless we managed to extract well over 100,000 people in a very critical situation, when I think Russians managed to send one airplane or something like that. But at the same time, it is kind of part of our foreign affairs reputation now. So with all of that in mind, does that make Putin's decisions sensible if you want to take over the world in a global game of risk?
As I said, I think he didn't count on the response. I think he was making a dangerous move, but learning from his previous maybe successes, he thought the West again is not going to unite, not going to do anything. I think Afghanistan was probably was on his mind, that the United States is retreating, where in fact we are pivoting from the 20-year war to something that is closer to our interests. So yeah, I think it was a miscalculation on his part as far as what we're going to do. Now, he thought he has a few options when he moved the troops. One obvious, he could attack, he didn't have to attack, right? So if he gets some concessions, he doesn't have to attack. If whatever happens, he could weaken NATO, right? If NATO would, some of the countries in NATO would say, that's not our problem. And the United States will say, or maybe United Kingdom will say it is. So he will kind of split NATO in half, and that disagreement is going to be out in the open and weaken it further. That didn't happen. I mean, there were some disagreements, legitimate disagreements, I think, with Germany primarily, but not on the scale of, we're still presenting a united front to him.
I see. So you're actually giving more credit to Europeans in keeping the NATO together?
I think I give most credit to Putin for keeping the NATO together. But I think because here's the problem. Europe depends on Russia for energy, right? And this is not some abstract thing. I think I read somewhere that Germany imports 2/3 of its natural gas from Russia. There are
I think the last number I heard that sounded sensible, I think was 40%.
I think it's for the entire Europe. Right, so Europe is consuming 40% of gas, 40-something oil from Russia and coal. But I think Germany is more on the hook than everybody else. So this is not abstract. If you don't have enough energy in a modern democratic country, I mean, your people are going to suffer. I mean, if it's winter, it's cold. Your economy might, if your economy depends on gas, what are you going to do? So it's not nothing. Right, it's a big deal, and yet even Germany realizes how serious the threat is, and we are working with them. So they are considering building a port for liquefied natural gas (LNG), so that we and our allies Qatar can bring instead of gas going through the pipeline, we can bring the gas in large tankers, LNG tankers, and support Germany if we have to cut off the Russian gas, or if Russia cuts off gas. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that the allies are doing right, and they understand. I think for the first time, they really understand that this looks like a repeat of pre-World War II Hitler in that sense. I think they get it now, and that's Putin's miscalculation. He thought he'll get away with it. Now, his other option is to attack. Like the big one, right? The attack and not attack. So let's say he's not getting what he wants, right? So he could attack. Now, we are doing two things to prevent that. Number one, we are telling him exactly how he's going to suffer economically. Now, Russian economy is, like I said, is not a strong economy. If we cut him off, there are going to be severe consequences, economic consequences. Which again, if the number one thing for Putin is to be alive and remain in power, which it's two things that are interconnected, then he probably might reconsider, losing his economy. People being very upset with his regime. It might not be what he was originally looking for. The other thing that we're doing is more of on a tactical level, and that is, well, two things. We're sending tons of weapons to Ukraine. So every day Ukraine is getting stronger from the military technology perspective, right? I mean, they have an army that has been fighting Russians for 8 years and did not lose. Okay, that's something, that's a big deal. They've been fighting for 8 years with Russian-backed separatists, and I think Russian troops too in the eastern part of the country, and they did not lose. But now they're also getting extra weapons that can actually destroy Russian tanks and probably helicopters. They still don't have, I don't think they have anything against Russian aviation and rockets, but it's not nothing, right? If you can't have a ground assault with your tanks because you're going to lose a lot of them, I mean, that's a big deal. And another thing that we're doing is we are, I think for the first time maybe, we are actually publishing intelligence that we gather on his next moves. So United Kingdom and United States, we collected intelligence that Russia is planning a false flag operation, meaning they will create like a theater, right? They will create a play where supposedly Ukrainians attacked first, right? They'll use their own agents to pretend as if Ukrainians attacked first and then Russia responded, right? So it's a false flag operation, pretty classic, I would say. But the United States and the United Kingdom, we published this. So now if he decides to go through with this, it's not going to have as much effect. Not as many people will believe him, which is, it's a big deal. So he might reconsider that. There was another one that UK, I think, published that they might want to try to install a puppet government, and they even named names of people that they might consider. So that's another option. So those are the things we're doing to prevent it. What we're not doing is we're not sending troops. We don't want to have a armed conflict directly with Russia, because that could get out of hand. They have, they have a strong military, and we don't want to, two nuclear powers. We don't want to have that. So short of sending our own troops in there, we're doing everything we can to support Ukraine and discourage Putin from actually starting the war.
Well, one of the things that I think is important also to keep in mind is that there is no really settling with this person, because there is no really point at which he's willing to really stop. Putin is just kind of rolling on as long as he can, as far as he can. That's been like the historical tendency of Russia. It gains territory, it loses territory, gains territory, it loses territory. So I think that Europe doesn't want to be, at some point, they really don't want to be part of Russia. So I think that's really encouraging. But now we have actually a reader here in the chat that is writing, and I don't have this verified, that Russian Federation is blocking the Black Sea. What do we do with that? Says our commenter. So, I mean, it like we're expecting things to unfold in the next 24, 48 hours. Isn't this like what? Yeah.
There is a push.
There is a fog of war. There's a fog, and this is where I'm so impressed, really, like what you mentioned. And I just want to highlight it, the change in strategy of revealing the plans of Russian intelligence and all these setups. It's a big lesson that I guess our national security folks have learned since 2014, where they had information, they didn't release it because they thought that it would be better that way, and then it didn't. Crimea was annexed. So in this case, they're releasing information. And then the other thing that I wanted to make sure to throw in there is what I heard from the interview with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who talks about long-term strategic damage and then loss for Russia. And I think that's really kind of important to consider in the context of fuel supply to Europe. Because if there's a situation where Europe has to just forced basically to redirect itself in a different direction, it's going to be less likely to go back to Russia after that. And we already see big push away from fossil fuels, which makes a lot of sense considering where they're coming from, besides all the other reasons.
Yeah, absolutely, Yuri. So a couple of points I want to add. One is that there is a push inside the United States by politicians from both parties to impose new sanctions on Russia without waiting for Putin to attack Ukraine. So impose sanctions for what he's already done, and not make it as a consequence. Just do it up front. The other point that I completely agree with you. So if we make this analogy, if Europe is a drug addict to Russian energy sources like gas, and primarily gas, but also oil and coal, and if you're a drug dealer, Russia, you don't want to cut supply, right? Because if you cut supply, you're basically forcing your customer to look for alternative sources. And if he finds alternative sources, they may not come back to you. So it may become a permanent change. Such as, Germany was counting on Russian gas, and there was even a pipeline, Nord Stream 2, that was built that didn't go into operation yet. It's pending approval in Germany. Well, if we have a conflict with Russia, that pipeline may never get approved. Now, Germany might suffer initially because the prices for energy will skyrocket, and they're going to have to look for alternatives. But once they find alternatives, all of a sudden, that LNG terminal I was talking about makes a lot of sense to build. Once they find alternative supplies and also switch to more renewable energy, which they want to do anyway, they might just have to do it faster. It might become more financially prudent to do it now rather than wait. Then they will never have to rely on the Russian gas again. So Russia will permanently lose its customer. So that could be absolutely a long-term consequence in this case.
Well, and then I suppose just the last point that I do want to make a point of saying is that Putin's been in power for over 20 years. He obviously wasn't elected, and there was the Russian elections are notoriously bad, and so there's really no proof that he's even been legitimately elected, considering that all the terrorist acts that were caused by the security services in Russia to get public opinion in his favor, to on and on. But this is not a person who operates on our kind of a scale of values and so on to begin with, because Russian culture and Soviet culture is kind of different from American, but that's a different conversation. But that's already one big difference. But on top of that, he's just been in power for a long time, and as you point out, as I agree completely, Russia is a mafia state, and when we have people who have been in power for a long time, and they've been told for a long time how great and amazing they are, they start doing crazy things. This is, perhaps this is a pitch for term limits. My personal is consecutive term limits. I say at least get Putin out of there for a while, but of course he was able to do that with Medvedev. So there we go. No perfection. What's the solution here? Because, here's the thing. People who are very aggressively determined towards Russia go back to the quote of Carthage must be destroyed. I don't know precise how it sounds in English. I'm more used to saying it in Russian. But this is old, Roman conflict that basically that when you have this troublemaker that you need to destroy it, not leave a stone on stone, just level the ground. Is this, do you see this kind of a situation ever unfolding in the foreseeable future? Or do you feel like if Putin keeps making these decisions step after step, he's getting closer to that outcome?
Again, they have nuclear power, right? So there's a limit of what we can do. I think containment, like we had with the Soviet Union, is the solution here. But the good news is that the West woke up to the real threat, and we might be able to just successfully contain that country while it's under Putin's regime, and not let him, because it's not just military, it's hybrid wars, it's disinformation, propaganda, he's using all of this against us. So once we woke up against it, I'm hoping we collectively will be able to, win, or can at least contain Putin's aggression. So I don't have a long-term solution here. I think, was it Masha Gessen who said that Putin is only going to leave Kremlin with his feet, dead, basically, with, in a coffin. He's not leaving on his own. Now, how that's going to happen, natural death or something else, we don't really know, and we don't know when it's going to happen. But the important thing for our American listeners or English-speaking listeners, the important point here, this is not about Ukraine. A lot of people may say, well, it's somewhere far away. Who cares? Let them solve their own problems. That's the wrong impression. Putin is against democracy itself. He, as a result, he looks at us as his main opponent, geopolitical opponent. That's why he was interfering in our elections in 2016. That's why he was so happy when we had Trump. He does, by the way, he does the same hybrid war in Europe against our allies, against democratic countries. It just happens so that right now, the fight against that regime is in Ukraine. That's his next target. That's where we're drawing the line. But please, like, don't fool yourself. This is not going to end with Ukraine. This is not about Ukraine per se. He is interested in undermining our countries as well, and he has done it before. He's done it in 2016 in the United States.
Yeah, I don't have to go looking far for an example. Well, perhaps on this note, let's stop here for this evening, and we'll see if there is some interest in this perspective. Perhaps we shall continue. If not, perhaps we'll just refer to Russian and continue as before, speaking about all the important things that do need to be discussed. In the meantime, Dmitry Abramson, thank you so much for joining me tonight on this special English language stream of Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and